Good morning. Well, I'm Stefan, you know that already. This is always a hard part, the first 2 minutes. When do I start? And once I get started, you can't stop me. So you have to stop me. So heads up. I'm sorry about the room. That's the reason why I'm here in this room. We're going to talk about fire ventilation, as you know. I'm going to do the basic stuff, a little bit about positive pressure ventilation. And I have my two associates here, Christian Emrich and Steve Kerber. So they're going to fill in any blank holes in this, and we're not really sure about this. It'll work as we go along, but I have a couple of hours in this, and after that, I think one of them or two of them, both of them are going to sort of take over the show a little bit, or I'm not sure if it's going to be here or move back to the classroom. We can't do any PowerPoints and stuff like that in here. I've been doing research on fire ventilation for like 18 years. My first experiments actually, I lost the building, but it was a 4-story building. But that was fun. No, not fun, but interesting. Sort of interesting. And I've sort of changed a little bit. I used to do all the PowerPoint stuff. I mean, I did like 80 PowerPoints in 3 hours, which is not very fun, really. But I skipped the PowerPoints, so we'll be using my models today. This one, and I have 2 more in the back to show the basics, and I can show you basically anything we can do on the fire ground this afternoon. We can do some stuff there. I'm going to show you the model here first. So this morning is in here. This afternoon we'll be on the training grounds, do some demonstrations and some measurements. You're going to do some measurements to make some curves and stuff like that, numbers and calculations and all that. So bring a calculator and a pen, paper to write on. I'll bring the rest. I'll bring the smoke. Any questions or comments or whatever, just feel free to jump right in and we'll have a discussion about this, I hope. And I'm sorry, I haven't really talked to you earlier this week. I've been a little bit busy. Steve is my PhD student, actually. So Monday we had a meeting with the other professor in Lund. Yesterday he helped me a little bit. We need to do, as any fireman in Sweden, we have to do, as instructors, we have to do 2 hot exercises every year. And I usually do those, so we had one of those yesterday. Steve helped me a little bit about that. That's why you saw me sitting in a wheelchair, which was kind of nice. It's my afternoon yesterday. But today I'm here, so I'm not really sure. I know there's 12 nations in here, at least. And some of you guys I've met before. I've seen your face in here before, haven't I? There might be 2 reasons for that.
No, I did not.
This was very good, or it was very bad. There's a third option as well, but we'll skip it. And I know Carol from before, and I understand that you basically fell in love with Ida. He has asked me about my daughters, by the way, so keep him out of your house. That's a good advice, I think. And some of you guys I have on Facebook, so it's good to see you in real life for once, and not only on Facebook. So I think we've set the scene a little bit. It's okay to raise any questions and to make any remarks. And I would enjoy the discussion very much in here, of course. Let's say, where do I start? I start by pushing a button. Like that. Oh yeah, I'm on duty. I tried to get rid of the full week. I couldn't do that. We are sort of short-staffed. So if I get a call, I'm going that door, but I have people who can take over here, so it won't be a problem. I have 2 calls this week. So we usually get like 2 calls every week, so I'm good. It shouldn't be anymore. There we go. Okie dokie. Fire ventilation. It is a fire ventilation class, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Not the command stuff today. I know that, well, I understand that Frederick talked a little bit Monday about 2 things. Do you remember what he talked about when I say 2 things?
Why?
Yeah, well, that's true. It's coming back. Ventilation control and fuel control. Is everybody on my side, so to say? You all aware of what we're talking about here? So the fire that is fuel controlled is driven by the fuel, basically, the fuel characteristics. And the fire that is ventilation controlled is driven by air, exactly, ventilation. Which means when we link this to what we do for fire ventilation, if I have a fuel controlled fire in a room and I open the door, what will happen to that fire? Well, eventually, but not very fast, and in the first couple of minutes or even perhaps hours in the worst case, or in the best case, nothing much will happen. You can't really see that you open the door. If I have a ventilation controlled fire and I open the door, what would happen? It will happen a lot of things, perhaps. You can have anything from a kaboom to you have a full spectrum. Things can go still very slowly, but they can also go very fast. So this is, when we're talking about fire ventilation, we have to be aware of what we're doing here. As soon as I bring air to a fire, by fire ventilation and the stuff we do, something might happen. Okay. Is it hot in here? Perhaps. So, now we're going to start to, a little bit early perhaps. I need that to be sort of red hot. Well, it might work anyway. Just have to watch my fingers a little bit. This is a, you haven't been to the gray fire drill house yet, but you've seen next to the trains, there's a large gray building. This is an exact copy of that building. Well, close enough. It looked just about the same. There's a staircase, and there's 2 floors, and there's an attic to it. So what I do here, we can do the same in the training fields, of course. I'm just going to see if I can, oh, we start to get some smoke in here. Someone left the stove on, and someone left some burning material on the stove, so I get the fire, and I will get some smoke. What's the density of air in this room, approximately? 1 point.
1.18.
Yeah, let's say 1 kilogram per cubic meters. Any Americans in here?
Close, Canadian.
Yeah, but you're still using metric, so.
Yeah.
Thank you. Can't you tell your friends on the other side of the border to try to use metric as well?
Yeah, they don't like listening to people not in their
We
border.
try.
I'm going to get a drawing to Frederick later.
He
With.
says it's no problem because all the plans he normally gets are in feet anyway.
Okay, he can do that. So every time you do a presentation in the United States, you have to convert everything to feet. British thermal units. Okay, sorry. At approximately 20 degrees C, the density of air is about 1 kilograms per cubic meter. If I heat up the air to about 300 degrees, what's the density? Ah, no cheating.
About one.
You should have density of air up here. Sorry. Well,
0.8.
1.2. It's about half at 300 degrees. So when I heat up air, and in this case we have a fire and we have smoke, but we can leave out the smoke for a minute and just talk about air because it's basically the same thing. The big difference is that I add some stuff to the smoke, to the air, so I get smoke, which makes it visible, which is good for us. We can see what we're doing sometimes. So I heat up the air, and the density decreases to about half, or if I increase the temperature, it will get even lower. So when I heat up air, the molecules start to move, and they move faster, and they need more room, so they expand. So that is why I get a lower density. The air expands when I heat it up. In this room, I heat it up, and the air expands. So, since it's closed and it expands, it has no way to go, so the pressure will increase. So basically, I have a higher pressure in here than I have out here. And since the pressure is dependent on the temperature in the room, I will have different pressures in the different rooms because I have different temperature in the room. It's hotter in the room where I have the fire. It's hot here as well. I can feel it on the glass. That's cold. That's a little bit hot. That's hotter. That's not so hot. It's cold. So I get a temperature difference, which means I get a pressure difference as well. I have a high pressure, a little bit lower pressure, and out here, let's say it's a zero pressure. Not zero, but relatively speaking, it's zero. Higher pressure, a little bit lower pressure, a little bit lower pressure, lower pressure. So this air I heat up, it starts to move from this room to this room, and from this room to this room, to this room, and out to the staircase. So one thing that happens in the fire is that I get movement due to temperature differences, which creates pressure differences as well. I also have temperature differences in the vertical. We all know that since the hot air is lighter than air at 20 degrees, it will start to raise. Buoyancy. So I will have a difference in temperature in that way, and I will also have a temperature difference in that way, which means I have a pressure difference in that way, and I have a pressure difference in that way. Is something happening back here? Oh, my blanket. Bummer. So I have a higher pressure in this room, lower here, lower here, lower here, lower here. But I also have a higher pressure up here and a lower pressure down here. So now I have to think in that way and I have to think in that. In smaller rooms, this is not a big problem. I can sort of only, I can keep to thinking I have different temperatures in different rooms. But if I have a large room, which I'll come to later in another model, I also have to consider that I have temperature even within a room in that way, which means I have pressure difference within a room as well. Okay, higher pressure, lower pressure, lower pressure, lower pressure. Here comes the fire service. I need more smoke, sorry. I think. Ooh. Ouch. I haven't burned my fingers yet. And today is not going to be the first time. Here comes the fire service. Oh, we have a fire call. And we go to the scene and we go through the staircase. And we go up the staircase and we go into the smoke, and eventually we'll find something and put it out. Or we find a window, perhaps on this side, and we open the window. Can we crank up the fan a little bit? I think it's on 40. Can we get it on 50 or something? Well, we are firefighters, so we're supposed to eat smoke, like the Americans do. Ah. Well, I asked you about cheaters yesterday.
You know what they are. Why do you know what they are?
Do you know what a cheater is? And he actually told me that some guys in New York still use them. They don't have the face piece. They have the face piece, but they have an extra. Like, what do you call that? For scuba diving?
Scuba mouthpiece.
Yeah. Just put it in the mouth without the breathing apparatus. That's a cheater. That's for the tough guys. Okay. I open here and I open over here. I have ventilated the structure. What's happening? And why? Because due to the pressure differences, I will get a flow. Was that too much, perhaps? Well, as long as you don't get smoke, I can take it. I have a higher pressure here, a little bit lower here, lower here, and I open the door, the window and the door, so due to the pressure differences, I get smoke to flow from high pressure to low pressure, which is 0 out here, relatively speaking. And due to the buoyancy, I will also get, I won't get in, I can close here. I can close this one. So for anyone who's not in the fire service would probably believe that, well, if you open the door here, you will get smoke coming that way, but due to buoyancy, we don't. It goes up, since it's hotter and lighter than that one. So when I open here, I create a flow path from the door, and I think those of you who are close here, you can actually see that air is moving. You get some smoke out here, and you can see some of the smoke coming back in again, and it flows that way. Because I have a pressure difference in that way, but also in that way. And since I have the inlet area down here, and the exhaust opening up here, I will get the flow like that. No big deal. You've seen it before. You've seen it in real life. We close that again. And more smoke. Oops, that was almost my fingers. Are you all familiar with positive pressure ventilation? 100%? Neither am I. We still have things to figure out, but we talked about that yesterday. There are quite a few things to figure out, actually. I'm not going to talk about that because that's going to confuse myself a little bit. A lot, actually. I mean, the standard approach that we have been doing for many years is that we open the door and we move into the apartment, and we keep finding ourselves trying to find something in the smoke. That's the traditional way. And before I get to the fan, by the way, when we talk about ventilation control and fuel control, as soon as I open the door, I will, of course, provide air to the fire. No big deal. And when I do like this, when I create sort of a channel, from that way to this way, I will create an actual flow of air. So if I have a ventilation controlled fire, I might, in some cases, find myself in a very bad situation. Just by venting the fire, I will probably create some fire spread within the apartment here. I think the smoke is kind of bad today. What's wrong with these pieces? There's more piece up there. We're talking about the smoke. I don't get as much smoke as I usually do, but I think it's, as long as you can see it, I think you can see some of the smoke. Then one year, someone came up with this strange idea to use a fan to put out fires. Yes. Do we all know who it is? Well, he was involved, at least. What's his name? He's, I just forgot. From San Francisco. The guy, yeah, the battalion chief with the nozzle breathing stuff. Middendorf.
Oh, L.A.
L.A. Middendorf was battalion chief back then, and he was one of, the story says he was one of the guys who was involved in using fans. And they started to use fans they have for getting hot air balloons in the air, to fill them up with air before they start take off. So they use those fans. So they started to use fans, and that was like 30 years ago or something. So that it has been around for a while. And you've seen this before, and once you've seen it, you just ask yourself, why haven't we figured this one out before? It's very easy. Positive pressure ventilation or positive pressure attack, I don't really make that distinguish. I'm making a exhaust opening, I make an inlet, and I put the fan right there. Sorry, Steve and Christian.
We need a fan to blow back.
Yeah. Eat smoke. This is positive pressure ventilation or positive pressure attack. End of class. No, sorry.
But you do this now with a fuel control fire?
Now comes the questions. Okay. We can take this up. The thing is, if I do this in a fuel controlled fire, if I supply air to a fuel controlled fire, nothing much will happen in the beginning. But since I use a fan and I blow a lot of air, eventually something will happen. But if I use the airstream to attack the fire, I'm good. On the other hand, if the fire is ventilation controlled and I provide a lot of air to the fire, there is a huge risk that I push the fire to one room to the other. Take it out again. So I mean, fire ventilation, and especially fire ventilation is very easy. Come back to that. No. If we talk about just fire ventilation, I have the fire, which increases the temperature, which increases the pressure. So I have a higher pressure in here and a lower pressure out here. The smoke will, of course, move from higher pressure to lower pressure. The nature is very fantastic. It always tries to even out things. Humans have nothing to do with that. We just disturb things. But the nature itself is fantastic. So if I have a high pressure here, and you can see it even when it's closed, there's always leakages in a building. And you have seen this in fires. You come to fire, the house is all closed, and at first you see nothing, especially at night. And suddenly you see some smoke coming out of the building somewhere. Simply because you have a higher pressure inside of the building and a lower pressure outside. So the smoke will move from, like it says in the, when you look at the weather reports, from high pressure to low pressure. It's the same in the weather systems. Air will always move from high pressure to low pressure. It's the same with water. It works exactly the same. In a hose line, like this, you have a pump and you have the nozzle. You have a high pressure here and you have sort of zero, over here. So the water will move from high pressure to low pressure. It's exactly the same with smoke and air. It moves from high pressure to low pressure. Oops. Where do I have the highest pressure at this point?
Just before the exhaust.
Up here? Are you sure?
Lower right corner. Because all the air you blow through has to go to that narrow opening. So pressure buildup is higher.
Do you want me to go in the deep discussion? We had a discussion about this yesterday. Well, we do. I'll start with my thoughts last week. I have another thought this week. That's why they call me a scientist. Generally, I would say we have a higher pressure here, a little bit lower here, lower, 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 and zero. But you have a point. And this is, well, you're all instructors, so I guess we can do the discussions here a little bit. There is a gentleman from Salt Lake City. Oops. Chris Garcia, battalion chief. And he's been doing a lot of work with partial pressure ventilation. And they use PPV and PPA for any fire attack in his area. But we were sitting down and talking one day, and he said, well, we all think we have the highest pressure down here when I have put up the fan. And low and low and low and low. He said, no, we don't. Or really, he said, we don't need a higher pressure. We don't need, if we have the fire here, or let's say we have the fire in this room. He said, we don't need a higher pressure in this room than in the fire room. All we need is a pressure in here that is higher than out here. If I have 0 here, and let's say I have 10 Pascal here, pressure, and I have 5 Pascal here, his idea is that that would be sufficient. because then I will have a pressure differential that is from 10 to 0, which is a difference of 10. Here I have from 5 to 10, which is 5. And the air, the smoke in this case, will probably take the easiest way. And the easiest way is where you have the largest pressure differential.
But how would you have 10 pascals difference in the non-fire room?
Well, let's assume you have the fire in this room.
Okay.
Okay.
But doesn't it also not matters because you're blowing a cool air in, which has a outer density, then when it leaves the fire room, the density gets bigger. So when you push that all through that smaller opening, you're going to build up pressure. After the opening, it's going to 0. But before that opening, you increasing your volume of the air, which still has to leave that little opening because you're having your pressure downstairs.
He's got a point.
Well, there's also doorways in between and everything
Yeah,
else,
yeah,
so it's,
yeah.
and the big difference between air and water is air is compressible, water is not. So, I mean, there is this effect going on
Yeah.
as the air moves
Yeah.
through the structure.
So basically, what I thought was pretty simple, like a week ago, 2 weeks ago, a month ago, that I have a higher pressure here, lower, 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 and 0. It seems that it's not that easy. And I haven't really figured that one out yet, but I'll do that in a couple of minutes, perhaps, or years. And you said something else as well about the opening size. You said the opening size here is smaller than the opening size down here. And that might be a clue as well, the opening size of the exhaust opening.
Yeah, I mean, that's a piece of it. However, as we're going to learn this afternoon, that you don't necessarily want an opening size that is smaller than your inlet size. So then what?
I'm thinking. Let me move back a little bit to not using a fan. We're going to get some more smoke. Large pieces. I close that one. And I close this one. Take this out. One thing that is kind of important when I vent a fire, is that I have a fire, I get smoke, I get hot air, and it expands. So I need to create an exhaust opening to get the smoke out. So I do that on that side. What am I missing? Yeah, well, okay, but without a fan.
Air to replace volume.
Exactly, I need air to replace what's going out. So I need to, I don't know if you can see it here, but I increased the flow a little bit. You're going to see it better in another model later. So I need air to replace what's coming out. It expands coming out, but I still have to replace. Otherwise, I won't get any venting. So I need inlets and outlets. And what is important here to realize that I have to have inlet openings that are large enough to provide enough air. And I can actually make a curve on that. Let's call this effectiveness. Close enough. And this is the ratio between the area of the inlet and the area of the out. And it will look something like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. I have a paper for you in a minute to show you that. I'm going to close this to get the sun. Sorry. I'm sorry. Which means this is, we call this, no, not thermal, we call this natural ventilation. No fans, no nothing. We just open. So if I need inlets and outlets, and the ratio between the inlet and outlet looks like that, which means if I have the inlet area the same size as the outlets area, I will get an effectiveness of about 50% or less. It's a little bit complicated than that, but basically. If I move up to 2, I get about 70%. Which means if I have an inlet area down here that is twice as large as the outlet area, I will get a more effective venting. I need a larger inlet area. If I move up to 3, it'll be about 90%. And after that, nothing much more happens.
What would 100% be?
In theory,
No walls.
no walls. Exactly. It's like that. So, but you will see a huge difference between 1 and 2. So if you have an inlet that is equal in size as the outlet, you'll see some flow. If you make a larger inlet, twice as large, you will see quite a difference in the flow. And I'll show you in a minute about that. And I have that on a little piece of paper, of course.
Stefan?
Yes, sir.
I have a question.
Yes.
If you bring it to absolute figures, if you have a 1 square meter opening and in and out, and you get a certain flow, and I double the inlet opening, I double both, then my flow will also double, if it keeps at 50%. I'll double both openings.
It would probably be, I would say you would get more than double.
Okay.
Because if you, and this is flow is kind of complicated here, it's complex. If you have an opening like this, if you have a small opening, let's put it this way. Let's say you have 1 square meter and you have a flow of 1 cubic meter per second, then the velocity will be 1 meter per second, okay? If you increase this to 2 square meters, then the velocity will be half, exactly, 0.5 meters per second. But since the flow here also creates turbulence, so around the edges here, you will get turbulence as the flow passes through the window or whatever it is. And that turbulence is dependent on the velocity. So if you increase the velocity, you will get a higher loss, a flow loss. So with a lower velocity, you will decrease the loss. So if you double the area, you will probably, since you get a low velocity, you will get the lower loss, you will probably get a higher, the flow will more than double. The effectiveness will more than double in this, since you get.
But couldn't it be also that if you, the amount of air, so say, now you're just talking about speed and an opening, but
Well, we'll move to fan in a minute. Okay. This is just natural ventilation. We'll keep the fan out for a moment. It's easier. Sorry, Steve.
So what assumptions are we making here? Because, I mean, right off the bat, are we assuming a inlet, like in your model, where the inlet is purely an inlet, and your outlet is purely an outlet? Because if you had a one-story, are we also assuming a certain size fire?
Yeah.
Or, I mean, because there's a whole lot of caveats that go with that curve.
That's a good point, which complicates things a little bit more.
Right.
I started easy, and you made it complicated. Okay, get some smoke. What Steve is saying here, which is a good remark, is that if I open this one, it's closed down here. It should be. Yep. I get a flow out. But since I don't have any other inlet openings anywhere, and the heat, the fire sort of, the heat source, it creates a flow in here. It creates pressure difference in that way and in that way. So the heat source will sort of create a flow, and you can see that I get smoke on top of the opening, and I get some flow in down here. So it's also, like you said, it's dependent on sort of the size of the fire and the temperature in the room and how fast the fire perhaps increases or decreases. But I guess if I open down here, I get almost like a sort of a one zone. I don't get as much air coming in this way.
Right.
Because most of the air is coming in that way, which complicates things a little bit.
Right.
But in that drawing over there, I just made we didn't really talk about inlets and outlets. That was just basically an opening with a flow. But that complicates things very much.
But how, Stefan, how is it change if you have a strong wind?
We'll keep the wind out of here. That's why I'm in here, you know.
Your curve.
You're bad. My office, 2 o'clock tomorrow.
I'll be there.
I do that to the students every time they ask a tricky question. My office this afternoon. Don't ask questions like that anymore. No, that's a good. We come to wind, hopefully, in a minute or so. Wind is always a problem, which we will probably see this afternoon when we're going to try to do some measurements. Disturbs things very much. Okay, the ratio between the inlets and the outlets, like that. And as some of you, hopefully all of you already know, when I use the fan, something happening. Well, without the fan, the problem is really adding enough, to put it simple, the problem is really to add enough air to sort of supply or to replace the smoke coming out. But when I add a fan, the supply air is not the problem anymore. I get as much, I'm sorry. Sorry about that.
Trying to protect Christian.
Yeah, he's younger. He's supposed to live longer than
That's
we
right.
do.
Absolutely. I'm a lost cause.
I should be dead by now. Ah. If I use a fan, the supply air is not the problem anymore. The problem is at the other side. So to put it easy, there it is. It turns everything upside down. With a fan, it's the other way around. If I use a fan, I need an exhaust opening that is at least the same size as the inlet, preferably twice the size. or more. The problem with buildings is that most inlet areas are like doors, which are like 2 square meters, and most windows are like 1 square meter. But I can open multiple windows. That is not a problem. I can even open windows in different rooms, and I'm going to show that in a minute as well. Yes, sir.
Could you please change the top now of the chart? Put away natural and now we go to the...
Okay, sorry. Yes, of course, of course, of course.
Please.
Since I'm on video, I better.
Yeah, right.
Thank you very much. PPA or PPA. Things change when I use the fan. Suddenly, fighting fires has become very easy. If I have a fan and I can get the smoke out, we don't have to search for people or search for the fire anymore. We just push the smoke out and we can see clear through. In theory. In reality, it's still something else. More smoke. One example is if I forget to have an exhaust opening and only provide an inlet with a fan, is that good or bad? That's really bad. What am I doing here? I'm providing air to the fire. I'm not getting anything out of there. And I'm also disturbing things. I stir things around. I mean, if due to buoyancy, I would probably have, it's hotter up here and not so hot down here. And since the crew is crawling around on the floor, if I don't have an exhaust opening and I provide air with a fan, I stir things around and that will get hot everywhere. And I even mix in air with the fire gases, which might cause some more problems, of course. But once I get the opening, oops, it clears out pretty quick. No big deal. From high pressure to low pressure, exhaust openings, inlets, outlets. I can even, I mean, I get questions of all kinds of stuff here over the years. We'll take that one out for a minute. I'm going to get some more smoke. Sometimes when I get home, my wife asks me, have you been on a call today? No, I had a class today. And the other day, so you had a class today? No, I went to a call today. She never knows. I always smell like this. In the best case, it doesn't really matter if I use natural ventilation or a fan. When I vent the fire, I should have the exhaust opening as close to the fire as possible to get the smoke out as fast as possible, to create the pressure differentials that is as large as possible. Sometimes we can't do that. In this case, I'm going to open here in this room, and I put the fan up, and I get the smoke out in the back. I got the smoke out, but not in that room. Is that good or bad? To who? It depends. I mean, there might be some victims in this room. Is this good or bad for them in the long run?
Better than the first way?
Better than this?
No, better than opening that window right there.
That's a good point. It's still better.
Just because the smoke clears just because the smoke clears in your fuel limited fire does not mean it is better in a ventilation controlled fire where
No.
you just blew the fire through that room.
And I might induce something in there. On the other hand, if I can clear the smoke all the way up here,
You can put the fire.
I can put the fire out. And then I can search, and I can find another window, and I can still make it faster.
Which is why I said the rear window was better than this one.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
You waste also generate smoke explosion if you charge the smoke.
I'm sorry, a little bit louder.
Sorry, I don't think there will be an issue. If you close the windows
Yeah.
and you push with the air, in the last room, you must concentrate smoke until the gas abolition. Burning gas and perhaps replace flame or
Okay.
generate gas explosion if there's a situation.
You might do that. Personally, I think it's, well, first of all, again, it depends. It's probably very much situation dependent. But generally, if you, like we're doing right now, I clear the smoke out to that room. I still have smoke in this room, but since it's closed, at least in theory, I don't really get any movements in this room. I mean, in a small room I might do it. I might get some movement in the opening, but in here, I just pressurize things. I don't really move things, but again, there is a small risk that I might create some ignition of the gases. But I mean, even in this case, I'll close this one. Even in this case, you might very well induce some kind of a backdraft, or what some of my colleagues would say would be like an extreme fire behavior thing. There's no such thing as an extreme fire behavior. If we talk about pressures here, the pressure inside the room, we are still talking about very low pressure. We're talking about Pascal. How much is 1 Pascal?
1 decibel.
Sorry?
1 decibel.
Exactly. 1 Pascal is more or less equivalent to the pressure that paper is pushing on the floor. So 1 Pascal is very small, very small. Okay, we take out the fan a little bit. And we just have the fire. How much pressure will the fire create in this room, or in the apartment, really? You know, because you measured it.
It depends.
Thank you. Give me a number, quickly.
If you have an open box, it'll make 17 to 18 Pascal.
Yeah.
If you have a closed box, it can be higher than that.
Yeah. But it depends on the fire size and how fast it increases.
Right, so a fully developed fire of 1,000 C with an open window on this end would be on the order of like 18 Pascal.
Yeah. So anything between 10 and 30 Pascal, perhaps, in that range, 15 to 25. How much pressure will the fan induce? If I do like this, and it's all closed, no, almost. Now it's closed. How high will the pressure be in this apartment right now? Not in this one, but in reality. How high is the pressure induced by the fan?
It depends.
It depends, but in the range of
20 scouts.
anything between 20 and 50 perhaps. Depends on the fan and whatever. So I have, it's very small pressure and it's all in the same range. So it's a very sensitive system. So if I add, if I add some kind of a, let's say a backdraft, what I'm doing here, and suddenly I push air and I will get a backdraft in here. What's the pressure in a backdraft?
More than 50? It's a couple hundred, isn't it? 80?
At least a couple of hundred,
Yeah.
1,000 perhaps. It's very hard to make the measurements, but I had one student a couple of years ago, and we were able to measure like 1,000 Pascal in a very short, but which is a lot higher than this. But probably, well, in this case, with no exhaust opening, I might get a problem, but I also strongly believe that if I do this correct, which means I have an exhaust opening, the inlet, and the fan, it will be very hard for me to actually induce a flashover or a backdraft because I will push everything very fast out that way. So even if I would get some kind of a backdraft scenario, it will go that way.
Stefan,
Generally, sorry.
I have another question. Did somebody actually make the exercise of the heat balance? If you have an underventilated fire and you start ventilating due to the extra oxygen, heat release rates will rise, and when you have an exhaust opening, hot gases will get out, so there's energy out, but there's also energy liberated. Thus, the PPA system is able to release, to evacuate all the released energy in any circumstances.
I did it with a hallway in a room fire, and the heat release rate increased by about 60%, but it also, I would say 90% of it went away from the fan. That could change very much so with different size openings, different size fans, different fuel loads, different fire locations. So that's a future study. Let's put it at that, because to date, no one has done experiments with PPA in real houses with real fuel loads, varying opening size, opening location, and things like that. So that still needs to be done.
But he's going to do it next year.
We're working on it.
Yeah.
We'll get there.
Get there.
Fake erosion on like
Yeah, we're close. The problem a little bit with fire science is that we think we know some things, but we had a long discussion yesterday, Steve and I, and there are quite a few things that we realized that we still need to investigate. About the pressure is one thing. I still, well, for the class here, I'm still confused in my mind. I would still say, for now, that when I put the fan here, I will have a higher pressure on this side, and it decreases as we go along. But I'm not so sure anymore.
It depends on what pressure you're talking about. Static pressure or complete pressure?
And it depends on the exhaust opening probably as well.
It also depends on the fan, how the angle of the blades
Yes,
are.
yeah,
all that kind
yeah,
of stuff.
yeah. So we need to figure that one out. And I don't even have to add the fan. Even without the fan, I'm puzzled about the pressure inside the structure.
But then the differences are going to be smaller.
It's very small, but still, it's still a difference. I mean, if you have a 1 Pascal difference in pressure, it's still a difference.
Yeah.
So you will still get a flow. But I'm not sure you have those differences anymore, but you should forget that.
If we don't understand it without the fan, then adding the fan, we're kind of fooling ourselves to start.
Yeah. But again, just by looking at it, and you can see the same in the training grounds, and some of you guys have seen this in real life, if you put the fan and the exhaust opening, you will get the flow and you will get all the smoke out in seconds, as long as we're talking an apartment fire, basically. Which is a good.
Well, and be careful, because that's never been done, right? It's been done in practice, it's never been done in experiment or theory. So, I mean,
We need to look at it.
every type of ventilation in this model, or any fire training building, or in containers, or anything like that, where you can't increase the heat release rate and flash over rooms because they're training props. We're not quite sure the science and what goes on when all of a sudden that fuel load is 10 times what's needed to flash that room over, because it hasn't been done. So,
We don't know. That's
yeah, we don't know. the
we
exact
know it
answer.
works in reality.
Yes, it has worked in practice.
Yes.
It's also not worked in practice.
Yeah.
We don't have a really good handle on the why yet. So there's still some unknowns there, which is not uncommon with many firefighting tools, right? That we release the tools into the wild, and then we figure out the why later.
Yeah.
So it's
That's the problem with having PhDs in the room. It's like, it depends, and we don't know yet, and we're going to look at that next year, and stuff like that. So.
I have another question in that thing. I think all fans are used in the fire service are power fans, which generates quite a lot of flow and few static pressure. But there exist also other types of fans, like two-axle fans, many-axle fans. Do you know if any experiments have been done with using that kind of fan, mobile, to influence a fire? Because then you can go to higher pressures. And the pressure difference will be bigger, and then maybe efficiency will rise.
Again, it depends, right? So it depends on the geometry of the structure.
Yes.
So it doesn't matter what type of fan you have. If you go ahead and blow it against the wall, and it's got to make a right turn, a left turn, an upturn, another turn to get to where the fire is, then you're talking very different flow dynamics.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of. The answer is no. I don't know of a study out there that has looked at realistic fuel loads with those two different types of fans, and those two measured the pressures and things like that. And really the reason that it hasn't been done is it's god awful expensive to do things like that. I mean, I can tell you that the amount of money that it's going to take to do a somewhat respectable study on what we're talking about is on the order of $1 million US. I don't know.
He's going to do it. So.
Well, which luckily in the U.S. there's the ability to get money like that, but I don't know many places where I mean, Hong Kong, I mean, how much money is being spent on fire research for the firefighters? I mean, right, zero, right? Sweden.
I have models.
You get money to do models and some level of
Yeah.
real scale stuff. So there aren't a lot of resources in the world being used to answer these problems, which is an issue. So what are we left to do? We guess, right? Or somebody's brave enough to use it in practice on an actual fire and cross their fingers, right? I hope this goes the way I expect it to go, or I hope it works like it did in the model that we saw. So it's...
The fun thing is that we still know it works in most cases.
Sure.
If everything is right. Because I've talked about the fans a little bit, inlets, outlets, pressure, but in reality, like you just mentioned, you have interior doors, you have, we all know that in a staircase, if you're standing outside of a building and you open the door to the staircase, you can have 2 meters in, you have another wall, and then you have a corridor, then you have the staircase, the real staircase actually going up. In some cases, you have the door, you're standing outside, and you open the door, and you have everything going straight up. So that's also a big difference. So it's not only about inlets, outlets, and fans, it's also about everything else in between. And I can't tell you the answer to these questions because it depends, and we haven't looked at it. But in most cases, I think we can sort of figure out how it should work if we understand the pressure and the flow and what creates the flow. and what happens when we open things up.
And
It's a good
the
start.
dynamic of the fire.
Sorry?
And the dynamic of the fire.
And the dynamic of the fire. We have to bring all of this together. And there's one component here I really haven't mentioned. You had that yesterday with Tall Stefan. For those of you who don't understand this, the guy you had yesterday is Tall Stefan, I'm Short Stefan. That's the way it is. He talked about suppression. I mean, adding a fan and having inlets and outlets and understanding the fire behavior stuff is not enough. Because if you only put the fan here or vent without the fan, you still have to do something about the fire. You have to put the fire out. So you also have to get someone in there to get water or something else on the fire to put it out. Otherwise, it's useless. Just adding a fan is useless. You have to bring it all together. The fire behavior in the room, the pressure differentials, the flow, the fan, and you have to send someone in to put it out. We have to bring it all together in some way.